you have your Bibles, go with us back to 1 Corinthians chapter number 3. 1 Corinthians 3, and we'll look at verse number 17 down through verse number 23, Lord willing, today. So we spent a couple of weeks examining this chapter, and we'll look at the last few verses here located in this great chapter today. So we talked about, where we find the church of Corinth here at this particular time. So this, of course, is Paul's first epistle to the church there. Paul is writing with the purpose of trying to help them and trying to show them some things that they need some improvement with. Oh, it's green again. All right. So Paul here, he's writing, and we talked about, the primary theme and the focus of this chapter was on the fact that Paul said, hey, I wanted to give you things of more depth, but you were more carnal than you were spiritual, and I was unable to do that. And then in the course of this chapter, he begins to explain, the reasoning behind the problem and the issue. And Paul here highlights in chapter number 3, one of the problems and one of the issues that the church of Corinth has here is they're arguing over something that they shouldn't really be arguing over. They're arguing over, Paul or Apollos, and Paul explains through this chapter right here, it's not Paul, it's not Apollos, it's God that gave the increase. One of us watered, one of us planted, but it's God that gave the increase, and that's really where the power lies at, that they were just laborers together. So as we've looked at the breakdown of this particular chapter, we talked about their need in the first part in verse number 1 down through verse number 9. We began to talk about their nature in verse number 10 down through verse number 16, and then as we get into this last section here, we'll talk about their nurture. So Paul here, takes them through a little bit of this journey here of hey, there's problems, there's issues, there's this undercurrent of things that are wrong, and one of the big things that he has noticed is they're arguing over, Paul or Apollos, and Paul begins to explain to them in the course of this chapter, it's not me and it's not Apollos, but it's God that gave the increase, and he begins to explain to them, the foundation that they need to build, the things that they need to build upon it, how they begin to build that up, that those things are going to be tested and those things are going to be tried. And then as we got to the last part of what we looked at last week, in verse number 16, Paul brings them into a new thought here and says, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. So Paul says, hey, you've got these things that you're arguing about. You got these things that you're going to battle over. And then he reminds them, hey, we're laying the right foundation, and the right foundation is Jesus Christ. And when we lay that, we build upon that foundation, and all of these things. And Paul reminds them here in verse number 16 that they are the temple of God, and that's what they're trying to build, and that's what they're trying to establish, and that's what it is that they're trying to grow, and here Paul begins to show them the things that they need to do that. So there's a great need, and we see that they're disjointed, they're not in unity, they're not together. Paul tells them how it is that they're starting to get back together, and they lay the right foundation. They're not arguing over things that don't matter and those things that don't make any sense. And he begins to explain to them that they're the temple of God. They're the ones that are being built up. And then as we get into this last part here, Paul begins to explain to them, how it is that they take care of that. So if you go out today and you buy something, you'll get a set of instructions, and a lot of times it'll have care instructions on it. So there are certain clothes you buy, you don't want to put those in the washing machine because you'll ruin them. They won't be able to sustain that, and you want to know how to take care of them, and you want to know how to treat them right. Well, here in the last part of this chapter here, Paul says, hey, don't focus on if it's me or Apollos. Focus on the foundation of Jesus Christ. Focus on the things that you're putting upon that, because you're building the temple of God. And here's how you take care of it. And here's how it is that you sustain it. Here's how it is that you keep it going. And he shows them 5 things here in these last few verses on that subject and on that matter. The first thing I want you to notice here, he talks about defilement. Notice what he says here in verse number 17. He says, if any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. So Paul tells them here, hey, if you are the temple of God and you defile the temple of God, God is going to deal with that, and God's going to rectify that, and God's going to do something about that. And I thought about over in 1 Corinthians chapter number 11, when we talk about the observance of the Lord's Supper in verse number 30, Paul reminds the church there, and he says this: for this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. So what was happening there? They were eating and drinking unworthily. They weren't following the practice the way that they were supposed to, and they weren't following the rite and the ritual in the manner that God had intended, and they had deviated from that. And because they had deviated from that, Paul said this about it: there are many that are sickly among you. There are many that are weak among you. There are many that are suffering among you. And here's one thing that I firmly believe today, that we go through this walk of life and we suffer some things because we don't treat the temple of God right, because we don't take care of it the way that we're supposed to. Now, sometimes in life we kind of go on autopilot, so to speak, right? So let me ask you something. We're in wintertime now, and it's a little bit cool, and we've had some weather that is come out and broke out. How many of you this morning checked your tire pressure before you left the house? The owner's manual says to do that, though, don't it? And don't people recommend that you do that? You say, well, I've got them TPMS sensors. It tells me if it's bad or not. It tells me if it's too low or not, or anything like that or not. But oftentimes in our Christian life, we sort of get on autopilot as well. We don't go around and we don't do a service check. Now, I'm sure though, before Steve gets into that truck, you're supposed to do a check, right? I know Ricky does on his bus. He's got to do this check and say, I tested all these things and all these things work properly. Well, let me ask you something. When's the last time you done a checklist on your prayer life and said, am I doing that? When's the last time have we done a checklist on our study and on our Bible reading? When's the last time that we done that little checklist and said these things are supposed to be done? Now, where I work, there's a checklist. When you go in any restroom, on the back of the door, there's a checklist, and the people that are supposed to be cleaning the restrooms, they're supposed to check off that checklist. Now, I don't know all the things that they're good at, but I do know this: they're good at making check marks. Some of you get that in a minute. They know how to do that a lot better than they know how to do anything else. They know how to make the check marks, and we sort of do that ourselves just a little bit, and we get a little bit careless, and we're not paying attention the way that we ought to, and we get in a little bit of that mode of autopilot. And Paul says here in verse number 17 that if we defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. He reminds them of what he said here in verse number 16. You're the temple of God. Wherever you go, you take Jesus with you. Wherever you go. We're the temple. And here Paul says that we are supposed to take care of this temple. We're supposed to do the things that are right for this temple. If we're really the temple of God, then we're supposed to do what we can to do the best for the temple of God. Now, we want to take care of this building, right? We spent some time last Sunday and decorated, and especially with the weather that came in and a little bit of snow, I might be a little bit biased. But I don't think you'll find a prettier scene pulling in a church than you do this church right here. Little snow on the ground. There's real roping out there. There's bows, and there's all kinds of things that are out there. There's a brand new wreath on the fellowship hall door. There's all kinds of pretty things to look at. And we want it to look nice, right? We want it to be presentable. We want visitors to come in and feel like, hey, those people actually care about their church, and they want to take care of the building. Well, guess what? We're the building of God. We're the temple of God, and if we want to take care of this building, then we should want to take care of our building as well. And Paul, makes that plain right here. He says, if we defile this temple, God's going to destroy him, because the temple of God is holy, and we need to treat it as holy. Now, I can promise you this: there's plenty of times in my life I don't feel all that spiritual and holy, but we're still the temple of God. We're still the temple of God. And God says, I'm giving you this temple and you better take care of it. You better treat it right. You better do, what it is that you're supposed to do with this temple. And here he tells them, hey, you're the temple of God. Don't defile the temple. Make sure that you take care of the temple. Make sure that you're doing what you can to make sure that the temple is taken care of. We see defilement in verse 17, and we see deception in verse number 18. Paul's telling them what can go wrong. He says, let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool that he may be wise. And I've read this verse several times, and you probably have as well. And I've thought about it in all kinds of different ways. And when I've read it before, I've kind of added a word into it myself that's not there. Paul says, "Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world," and oftentimes I've read that, and I've sort of put my thought into it in the ways of this world. But that's not what Paul is saying right here. He says that we're the temple of God. Don't defile it. Take care of it. Make sure that you're doing what's right. Change the oil in it every 5,000 miles. And he tells them here to watch out for deception. He says, if any man seems to be wise in this world, if there's somebody out there and they seem to be wise in this world, notice what he says about them. Let him become a fool that he may be wise. Now, he talks about this in greater detail back in the first chapter of this epistle in 1 Corinthians chapter number 1. In verse number 21, he says, for after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks speak after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness, but unto them which are called, both Jews and Greek, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. That's why Paul says over here in this 18th verse, don't be deceived. First he says, don't defile. And then he says, don't be deceived. Don't think something that's incorrect. And what is he telling them to guard against right here? If anybody seems wise among you, and if they seem wise in this world, he says, here's what they need to do. Let him become a fool that he may be wise. Let me tell you who makes the best Sunday school teachers. Those that think they're the worst Sunday school teacher. They make the best ones. You know why? Because they're going to dig. They're going to study. And they're going to be, a little bit self-conscious. Now, you and I have seen people in this world, they think they know everything, and they think they have all the answers, and they know everything that they can possibly know. And those kind of people sometimes, they put on an air of arrogance about them, and they think that they're better than everybody else. And here's what Paul is saying: if that person seems to be wise in this world, if they seem to be somebody that's really intelligent and somebody that knows a lot of stuff, tell that person and warn this person to be leery in that. And when I thought about this verse and read this verse, and I even taught or preached on this verse before, I thought of it in the aspect of, people that know a lot of things that are happening, know a lot of things that are going on, and they know a lot of stuff. But here's what I believe. I believe it's okay for you to be intelligent. I believe it's okay for you to know how to do stuff and how to fix stuff and how to be those things. That's not what Paul is saying here. Paul is saying, if that person seems to be wise in the world, let him do this though. Let him become a fool. That way he can be wise. Because one thing I know, you can't teach somebody something that already knows everything. You'll work with some of them tomorrow. You might ride home with one of them today. I don't know, but you'll definitely be around them at some point. And Paul says here that if somebody, he's talking about don't deceive yourself. If somebody seems wise, let him become a fool that he can be wise. Why is that? Because of what he said in chapter number 1, that the wisdom of God the foolishness of God is bigger and stronger than the wisdom of men. No matter how much we learn and no matter how much we know, here's what God is telling us, that we should always be in a position that we can learn a little bit more, that we can take in a little bit more. And here's what we should know, that none of us know it all. And none of us ever will. But how do we get knowledge and learning? By putting ourselves in that state of I don't know anything. Here's what I found over the course of the last 25 or so years of my life. The more I learn about the Bible, the more I realize how much I don't know. The more I learn, the more I understand and begin to see just how big it is. And here's what I've learned. The Bible's bigger than John 3:16. The Bible is bigger than that 23rd Psalm. You know, God's much bigger than all of that. And, you know, God's bigger than Sunday and God's bigger than what we can even imagine. But here's what I've found. When we get to the place that we think we don't need to know anything else, then we stop learning and we shut down and God can't do anything with it. I really believe this, that God can do something with a hungry student. God can do something with somebody, you know, that is willing to work and abases themselves and puts themselves in a position where they want to learn a little bit more, where they want to, you know, gravitate a little bit more, when they want to get better. I imagine down through the years, some of Brother Steve's favorite players haven't been the ones with the most talent, but probably those that are willing to stay after practice and says, hey, I can't do this. Can you help me with that? I'm not able to do this. Can you show me that? Can you teach me that? And here, Paul tells the church, don't get to the place that you think you know so much. You need to be as a fool and not as wise. And when we put ourselves in the position of foolishness, God's able to give us His wisdom. And when we're working, you know, inside the confines of our wisdom, then we can't accept God's wisdom. So here, you know, Paul's saying, don't be deceived by that. And then verse number 19 and verse number 20, he talks about the aspect of discernment. He says, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. Now, there's a little bit of discernment. The end of verse number 20, there's a very important word, and that word there is vain. And there's one book that talks about that subject more than any other book, and that's the book of Ecclesiastes. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we see vanity. Solomon mentions vanity first off in the beginning of this book, in verse number 2. He says, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. We go to the end of that book and all the way over to chapter number 12, in verse number 8. These pages are really thin. I'm afraid I'm going to rip this thing. In chapter 12, in verse number 8, Solomon says again, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, all is vanity. In between that, Solomon discusses vanity 26 times. 12 chapters altogether. The subject of vanity comes up 28 times in those 12 chapters. Almost 2.5 times per chapter is Solomon discussing the concept of vanity. Now remember, Paul is warning them, don't defile the temple, don't deceive yourself and fool yourself. And he tells them here in verse 19 and 20 to have the right discernment. He says the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. God doesn't care how well you can manipulate an Excel spreadsheet. You don't care. God doesn't care how many of these things that you're able to do. He says, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. Solomon talks about vanity and that everything is vanity. And you know, for some of us, we've seen those people that are a little bit vain, and we've seen those that are a whole lot vain. And you know, you've worked with them, and I've worked with them. There's a guy that I work with now. He buys his cologne in 55-gallon drums. And I'm convinced every morning he dives off into it, because you don't have to check the parking lot to see if he's there. You know if he's there or not. And you know when he gets close to you. And he's always dressed really nice, and his shoes are always shined, and he's always, really, just well groomed and well presented, and he comes off that way. Now he's really not a vain person, but if you didn't know any better, you think that he would be. And vanity is all about me. Brother Jeff talked about, an influencer, and it amazes me that's a job title in today's time. But we live in a world of look at me. Look what I've done. Look how nice my clothes are. Look at what it is that I've bought and I've acquired, and look at the car I drive, and look at the house that I live on. And we live in a world of look at me. What's different as the church? We should be saying, we want you to look at him. We don't point to us. We point to the cross. We don't want people to see me, because when they see us, guess what? They see a fallible human being that has issues and has problems and is not perfect. What do? We point them to the perfect Lamb of God, and we want them to see the Lamb of God. And here, Paul begins to say, you need some discernment about that. The wisdom of this world is foolishness to God. All these things that we know and all these things that we focus on, all these things that we think about and we put energy to. But here Paul says, it's foolish to God, those kind of things, because what? The Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they're wrapped up in vanity. We've got a church here that we're reading about that people are fighting over. Well, Paul's the one that led me to the Lord. Well, Apollos is the one that led me to the Lord. And they're being vain in that. But here's what Paul is saying. All of that's foolishness. Solomon talks about it. It's all vanity, and it all doesn't really add up to anything. It doesn't really all mean anything. And he says that we should have this discernment that the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise. God knows what they're thinking. He knows that they're steeped in vanity, and the church ought to be different, and the child of God ought to be different. He talks about defilement. He talks about deception. He talks about discernment. And then in verse number 21 and verse number 22, he talks about dependence. Notice what he says here. He says, therefore, let no man glory in men, for all things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all are yours. Here's what you've got to understand today. That if you're here today and you're saved by His grace, you're not more saved than anybody else. Conversely, you're not less saved than anybody else. But what do we do in life? We get caught up in politics, and we get caught up in positions, and we get caught up in all of that kind of stuff that's out there in the world, and we forget that we're to have this dependence. He says, therefore let no man glory in men. What we have is not of our own fruition. What we have and all of our works and all of our labors and all of those things that that we build in this walk of life, when we depend on those, they can be gone just like that. There are plenty of people that 2 weeks ago they had a job and now they don't. There are plenty of people that 2 weeks ago they had a home and now they don't. There are plenty of people that have lost lots of things. And whether it's a financial reason or a fire broke out or whatever it is, there are plenty of people out there that they were depending on this thing, and then that thing is gone. Here's what I've learned in life: things can disappear. Sometimes I just lose them. Sometimes I've laid them down and I don't know where it's at. Whenever I start a project or something like that, at home, there's a very important person that needs to be involved, and that's the person that keeps up with where I lay stuff down at. Because I might start something, I've got one tape measure, by the time I get done, I've got 7. And I don't know where 8 of them are at. I need somebody to tell me where the hammer is. And I need somebody to guide me. Here's what Paul is saying. He says, don't glory in men, because you have everything that you need. Whether you're Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present, things to come, all are yours. It's not based on your accomplishments. It's based on what Jesus has done for you. And they forgot that here. They've created, this culture where they're depending on themselves, and they've created this culture, they're depending on their works, and they're creating this culture where they're depending on their associates and those kind of things. Now, there's all kinds of people in this world that, we sometimes hitch our wagons to. There's a gentleman that used to work at our company. He was in Orlando. There's a lot of people that have positions because they were his friend. He's left. Now what they're discovering is all those people don't really know what they're doing. They're not as smart as they thought. What were they dependent on? They were riding on the coattails of Rich. And now Rich is gone. He's went somewhere else. They hitched their wagon to the wrong place. And there's a lot of people out there today, they're hitching their wagon to money, and they're hitching their wagon to positions, and they're hitching their wagon to all kinds of things. And you know where we ought to hitch our wagon? We ought to hitch it on the cross. Because let me tell you this will always get you where you need to go. Every single time. We're creating a dumbed down culture though. I like to do this. I like to watch people, if you give them directions on how to get somewhere. Because most people don't know in about a mile you turn right. Most people think that's somewhere between 3 foot and 700 miles. They don't know, right? What are they dependent on? And we're all bad for that. And we were coming home the other week from a little trip. And I cut the GPS off. You know why? Because I knew where our house was. I knew where I was going. But you know what? Wherever we go, we got to punch in the coordinates, and we got to have somebody else tell us, that this is where we're going to turn, and this is the thing that we're going to do, and we're going to follow that, and we're going to listen to that. We've created a dependence on that. Where should our dependence be created? Where should our dependence be? Our dependence should be to Jesus Christ. And here, Paul makes that clear in verse 21. He says, let no man glory in men. Don't be proud that Paul led you to the Lord. Don't be proud that Apollos led you to the Lord. Don't be proud that you go to Cephas's church. Don't be proud that you have this position in the world. Don't be proud of you have this much money in the bank, or you have this kind of car, or those kind of things. And Paul says here, your dependence doesn't need to be linked to those kind of places and those kind of things. He says, because here's what you've got to understand, that all things are ours. Why? Very important thing, the last part here in verse 23. Notice the durations. He says, and ye are Christ, and Christ is God's. How is it that we can make this claim? How is it that we're able to say, that we're in this particular standing? Because here's what we have to understand. Here's what we have to know today. Now, as far as the world's standards may go, you may not be rich. The world may look at you and say, well, that's not a rich person. They need to have X amount of dollars in the bank. Well, what's God's standard for being rich? John chapter 15 and verse number 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away, and every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. What is God's standard of being rich? Not that we're producing our own fruit, that we're producing fruit for Him. That's his standard. That's the person that's doing right. That's the person that's doing well. He says in verse 3, now you're clean through the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me. I am the vine, ye are my branches. He that abideth in me and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. What does Paul say about this in our text? Ye are Christ, and Christ is God's. Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. My Father's the husbandman. In other words, he's the overseer. He's the caretaker. He's the one that is making sure that everything is in proper order. And we know that if we're in Christ and Christ is in God and Christ is in us, then we're exactly where we're supposed to be. That we're following this the way that we're supposed to. And what's the duration of that? It's forever. We're His. Ye are Christ. Now that signifies that there is a possession that is there. Now, in this world, I had a gentleman that I was trying to talk to a little bit this week, and he was the head of one of our committees at work, and now he's not the head of the committee. He stepped down, and but people are still calling him, and he's still halfway dabbling in it just a little bit. And I finally told him, I said, you need to step away from that. And I told him, I said, have you ever sold a car? And he says, well, sure. I said, did you go wash it after you sold it? It's not yours anymore. Let it go. Don't worry about it. Just leave it be. How long do we belong to Christ? Forever. There's a possession that is there. You're Christ, and Christ is God's. He is the only begotten of the Father. We have a direct link to the very God of heaven. And it doesn't get any better than that. You might be the best friend of the CEO, but what happens when he's no longer the CEO? You might be, the son of the person that owns the company and owns the business, but what happens when that person is no longer there? Because I can tell you this, God's never got fired. God's never quit. God's never moved on to other opportunities, which can mean they quit or got fired, by the way. He's not done that. How long did He want you for? He wanted you forever. There's no need in buying the extended warranty because you're going to be His forever. You belong to Him. When we realize that we have this temple and we've got to take care of it. We've got to look after it. We want to make sure that we don't defile it. We want to make sure that we're not deceived. We want to make sure that we're using, the right discernment. We want to make sure that we're following after these right things. Because I've found this to be true, and there's a lot of people that don't understand this, but you'll understand what I'm going to say. Being a Christian is not a part-time gig. It's not a part-time job. And you can't just leave it whenever you want to. We done a thing at work Friday because of the weather. On Thursday, we declared it an inclement weather day. And what that means is you don't have to show up to work. You don't get paid, but there's no penalty. You don't get attendance points for it. No pay, no penalty. Well, we had people show up that didn't know that was the thing. So you know what they did? They went home. They left. And you know what we could do about it? Nothing. Not one single thing. And I had all kinds of people complaining to me and all kinds of things that were being said, and some of them, are younger people, and don't take this wrong. If you're under 40, let me explain this now. Let me tell you what you know. You don't know jack squat, all right? You don't know. They left because the policy said it might be dangerous for you to come to work. But I guess it's okay to go back home. That's what they wanted to do. There are things in this world that make no sense. But I'm glad that we have something that does make sense. It's not a part-time thing. We don't leave when we want to. We don't say, and you've heard, I'm just not feeling it today. It's not a part-time thing. It's a full-time thing. We are His. He is ours forever. And nothing changes that. Let's have our heads bowed, our eyes closed for just a moment. Miss Bailey would come play softly for a minute. It's your temple. You today are the temple of God. You have a right and a responsibility to your temple. Now, what we like to do is we like to tell other people what they should do with their temple. And they should do this and they shouldn't do that. And I don't understand why they do this and I don't understand why they do that. And we like to judge other people's temple. But let me ask you something. How's your temple today? Are you using the right discernment? Have we deceived ourselves in any way? Are we defiling our temple? Are we not taking care of it the way that we should? We belong to God. He belongs to us. And this temple is yours. Are you treating it? Are you doing? Are you acting? Are you saying? Are you walking? Are you worshiping? Are you doing all the things like you're supposed to with your temple? If not, this altar's here for you. Whatever need you may have, whether great or small. Amen. I feel that's sufficient this morning. We certainly appreciate you coming out, being in the service today. Don't forget, Wednesday night, we'll go back and jump into the 4th paragraph of the church covenant and see how far we get there. So be much in prayer for that service. And then next Sunday night, let's be much in prayer for our service here. And do pray as we go. Carolyn, I'll call them tomorrow and make sure that date works out for them. I don't see why it wouldn't, but do be much in prayer for all the things that are upcoming here around His house. Anything else on anybody's heart or mind before we dismiss? Thank you. Nancy knows how old I'll be. All right, well, let's be dismissed in prayer, and let's look forward to what all God has in store for us, and let's certainly be much in prayer for Wednesday night as we continue on our journey through the covenant. That's all, Brother Dathan.